It's time now for County-Wide, a special presentation of Yavapai Broadcasting News. Join Paul David and Brad Miller as they talk with our community's leaders, newsmakers, and people in the know. You'll hear about the hot topics that affect all our lives here in Yavapai County. And now, here's today's County-Wide.
Welcome to the program. Brad Miller with you. It is County-Wide today. Our guest today is Dana Owens, Deputy Yavapai County Attorney, and more specifically, and the reason she's with us today, we're going to talk about the Sylar Newton case. 2-year-old boy out of Flagstaff that most of our listeners, I think, will be very familiar with, sadly. Sylar's little boy who died after reportedly disappearing during an overnight camping trip at the Beaver Creek campground almost 2 years ago. Most recently, his adoptive mother, Christina Priam, was sentenced to 17 years in prison on, I believe, child abuse charges. Dana will clear us up on that. And her mother-in-law, Nancy Collins, also of Flagstaff, also sentenced, I think, avoiding jail or prison time, but...
Yes, and that was her mother.
Her mother, I'm sorry, I said mother-in-law.
Christina Priam's mother, Nancy Collins, was sentenced to a lifetime term of probation.
Okay, a probation, but not behind bars in that case. Dana, thank you for coming in.
You're welcome.
We appreciate it. We appreciate your work on this case. This case did not go to trial. The sentencing of those ladies that we just described was reached through a plea agreement, and we'll talk about that too. This is a tough one for the community, for yourself personally, for everyone I think in your office, and everybody who's been touched by this child through this sad story. And the biggest question I think that we get, and one of the reasons we wanted to have you come in tonight, is it's always been clear to the public, all we can get is what the media provide, I think, and that's almost never the full story. So we want to try to get through you exactly what happened, or as close to what we understand happened as we can. We want to explain that, like most legal matters, this case may not be over. There are still some appellate options that these defendants have, and so if at any time as we chat there's something that I ask you or we get into a part of the case that's sensitive for those reasons or any other, just tell us and let us know that that's something that we might have to visit at another time, or just that today we can't do that. I know you'll do that.
Sure.
So let's get to it. 2 years ago, July night, the family, and this was the two defendants, the two ladies we mentioned, the little boy, Sylar Newton, and there were some other young people there as well, camping up in Beaver Creek. Can you give us the roster, if you would?
Sure. That's correct. There was Christina Priam, who's one of the defendants. She was accompanied on this camping trip by her mother, Nancy Collins, as well as Christina's two biological children, a boy and a girl. In addition, her son brought along another friend who was also a minor child, as well as Sylar Newton. And they all came to the Beaver Creek campground here in Yavapai County for a weekend and planned on, cooking out, camping, swimming, that sort of thing.
Right.
And that was last July 23rd through the 25th of 2010, actually.
Right. Sometime during the night, one of the evenings that they camped overnight, the story that the defendants, I believe, ended up giving, and I know this changed a little bit from day one through the process, but the story that the media, I think, is that we've gotten and that we've passed on to our listeners is that the little boy disappeared from the tent. That was the claim. They couldn't find him after a search of days, and some, I think, 3 or almost 3 weeks later, kind of an independent searcher did discover his body.
That's correct.
By then he'd been out there a long time, and there wasn't, obviously it was too late, but so then all of a sudden we have a child death. We don't know if that's a murder, a neglect case, if he indeed did just walk away. Is that what you were tasked with trying to find out?
Yes, well, primarily the Yavapai County Sheriff's Office, and I would add that there were numerous agencies involved in this, including the FBI, Coconino County Sheriff's Office, Department of Corrections, Department of Public Safety, many organizations and volunteers who dedicated a lot of time and effort into working on this case. Initially, during the second night that the family was at the campground, the report came in sometime after midnight. I think it actually was closer to 2 or 2:30 in the morning that Sylar, who was a toddler,
Yeah,
basically.
2 years old.
Yeah, had disappeared sometime in the night. And you're correct, the reports that were given by the parties were varied over the course of the investigation. And initially, the Sheriff's Office treated this as a missing persons case. Several different things were considered. One, that he'd been taken from the tent. Another, that he had perhaps got out himself and wandered off. Initially, all avenues were considered, all possibilities were considered. There was a huge search that was conducted under the direction of the Sheriff's Office that went on for days, even after it became clear that perhaps something untoward had happened, that they needed to continue to search just in case. Right,
and that came up empty, and eventually he was found by kind of an independent searcher. At that point, once his body was discovered, at what point did it become, we really need to talk, or maybe it wasn't even after the body was discovered, but at what point do we really need to talk? I guess I don't know if I want to say the word suspicion, but at what point did investigators start to think something happened, he didn't just wander away, or there's some different circumstance to this? I mean, these women, one of these women is in jail, is going to jail. So some kind of crime occurred. When did it start to become a criminal case for sure?
I don't know that you could ever pin an exact date on it, because to credit the Sheriff's Office, they continued to conduct this case sort of on a bilateral track, if you will, where they didn't know, and so continued to treat it as the potential for just a missing person, where there wasn't any criminal intent involved, but also looking at the possibility that maybe something happened. So I couldn't give you an exact date or time.
I understand, but I guess I'm asking more about the circumstance, or what occurred. What caused an arrest to finally be made?
Well, during the course of during the course of the investigation, it was learned that first of all, the stories weren't adding up. There were different stories about what had actually taken place between the two women, and their stories changed themselves. One of the things that was learned is that the two boys, who were minors, 14 and under, on the trip had been provided marijuana, while Christina Preem drove them from Flagstaff to the campsite.
She provided it to them?
Yes.
Okay.
And as a matter of fact, according to the boys, they were smoking marijuana on the way from Flagstaff with her in the car on the way to the campsite. Initially, those were the charges that were filed involving a minor in a drug offense. And those are serious crimes, and in Arizona that's considered, based on their ages, to be a dangerous crime against children. So those were the initial charges that were filed, and initially we didn't file any charges related to Sylar Newton being missing, because we really didn't know early on in the investigation what that entailed. Once his body was found, of course, it was endeavored, I guess, to try to find out what actually happened to him. So obviously there was an autopsy done. In fact, there were several autopsies done. The Sheriff's Office really spared no expense, and having various laboratories around the country examine remains and do testing to see if we could determine how that child had died. And unfortunately, there was no way, based upon the condition of his remains, to determine how he died. And that became a very important factor in the determination of what charges were actually filed against Nancy Collins and Christina Preem.
I don't mean to be dramatic, but his remains were largely skeletal.
That's correct.
It becomes very difficult for medical science to get a lot when remains are in that condition. At least in this case, that was the case.
That's correct, as well as the fact that his remains were found a little over a mile excuse me, as the crow flies from their campsite, but there was no way to determine if that is where he died. His remains were located in a wash area. There had been several heavy rains that had occurred after he was found to be missing, so there was no way to determine whether or not he'd actually died in the location where his remains were found. All of those things taken together make it very difficult to determine what, if any, foul play occurred in causing his death.
Right. We need to take a break, Dana, so let's go ahead and do that. We'll pause for a moment. It's a sad story, but an important one. Dana Owens is our guest today, Deputy Yavapai County Attorney, talking about the Sylar Newton case, and we'll be back right after this.
Here in northern Arizona and throughout Yavapai County, people count on Orkin Pest Control. With over 100 years of combined experience, nobody knows how to protect your home or your business from harmful or annoying pests like the Orkin Man. To start service, contact your Northern Arizona Orkin Pest Control. In the Verde Valley, call 567-5100 or Orkin Pest Control in the Prescott area at 775-8772.
Hi, I'm Steve Skurja with Yavapai Silent Witness. Marcel Gonzalez was murdered on this spot almost 15 years ago, back in March of 1997. We know that there is somebody out there who knows what happened in the alley that night. Yavapai Silent Witness is offering an $11,000 cash reward for information that leads to the arrest of Marcel's killer. For Yavapai Silent Witness, I'm Steve Skurja.
No, you're fine. No. It's not a criticism at all. You're doing fine.
The pain will not control us. It will never break us, define us, or keep us still. Because arthritis can't beat us if we beat it first. In the fight against arthritis, you need a weapon. What's yours? Visit the Arthritis Foundation at fightarthritispain.org.
Crack yellow. Found their way out of
Getting closer to nature can get you closer to your family. Go to discovertheforest.org.
Welcome back to the program. Again, our show today is about Sylar Newton, the 2-year-old Flagstaff boy, found deceased almost 3 weeks, I think, after his disappearance almost 2 years ago at a campsite in the Verde Valley. There was talk, Dana, our guest is Dana Owens, the Deputy County Attorney Prosecutor of this case. There was talk, Dana, about that Sylar, from witnesses that we saw in the media, that Sylar appeared to be on drugs or stricken or ill or something the evening prior to his disappearance. Where did that come from?
Well, that actually came through the investigation and speaking with the children in the campsite, as well as the adults in the campsite, Christina Preem and Nancy Collins themselves. What investigators learned once they started interviewing people is that Sylar had been witnessed by Nancy Collins actually with a part of a pill in his mouth, which was identified at some point as being Klonopin or clonazepam. That drug can have the effect of similar to a central nervous system depressant. So it can be prescribed as a muscle relaxant or for anxiety or things like that. Nancy Collins had a box with her medications in it that was apparently in the tent, and according to reports, the child had gotten into that box and gotten into the pills. The children reported that they saw Sylar falling down, they saw him falling asleep and nodding off, and at one point the children told investigators that they had actually splashed water on his face trying to revive him. They were that concerned about him.
The children took these measures?
That's correct. And they notified the adults who made the decision not to take the child to seek medical help and believed, excuse me, believing that he would sleep it off or would be okay later. Ultimately, what happened to him is unknown. We have no way of knowing. There are reports that when he went to bed to sleep that night that he was fine, but there are other reports that he wasn't fine, that he continued to be groggy and sleepy and was not acting as a normal 2-year-old child would. The truth is something that we don't know.
You just don't know.
We don't.
No one ever really will. It sounds like, okay, we're not going to talk about what it sounds like and speculate. We're going to talk about what we know. Given that the autopsy couldn't reveal a whole lot, we don't know if he ingested something, and we're just not really going to know that.
That's correct.
People are asking, did Ms. Priam give him something and isn't saying, or did he get into something on his own, as it sounds like was suggested, and that's something else that you just can't get a handle on? Is that right?
That's correct.
But that's where the charges against her, ultimately 2 counts child abuse, came from. Was this? Is that right?
That's correct. And actually, to be clear, Tina Priam was charged with one count of child abuse, basically under the theory that we know her as the custodial parent, the person who was in charge of him and had responsibility for caring for him, neglected to seek medical attention for him when it was clear, at least from the reports made by other witnesses, that he needed medical help immediately. She was also charged with several other counts in a separate case that were related to providing marijuana to the boys on the trip.
Okay.
But that was a separate case. However, when we resolved the case, we wrapped both of those up into one plea agreement and tried to take care of both of those situations at once.
Gotcha.
Nancy Collins was also charged with child abuse, but under a lesser theory that wasn't considered what we call a dangerous crime against children. It didn't carry as high of a range of sentencing. The penalties aren't as high. But again, our theory with her was that she was not the primary person in charge of that child. Tina Priam was.
The relationship was different. It made the dynamic different of the charge. Okay. So given that, the big question that I'm sure you're aware of that's out there on the lips of a lot of the public is, why wasn't at least Christina Priam charged with murder? And I think you've told us why. It didn't fit what we know happened.
Well, correct. And it helps to clarify, perhaps, to remind people that when the state brings charges against somebody, we have to have a reasonable belief that we can actually prove this case at trial, and the state's required to prove every element of every offense beyond a reasonable doubt. There was no way that we could link either Tina Priam or Nancy Collins to the child's death. We had no way of absolutely linking those. What we did know was that the child was in significant physical distress prior to his disappearance, and that no medical help was sought for that child.
Right.
And that's what we based our charges on.
And that would be common to many child abuse cases we see.
That's correct.
Through inaction, he died. I mean, the result of this whole sad story was that he died.
Right. Whether he died, there's no way of knowing if he died because of the drugs he ingested.
Right.
There's no way of knowing if he died from exposure. There's no way of knowing any of that. So how he died wasn't really considered. Now, the truth of the matter is that shortly after this episode, well, not shortly after, several weeks later, he was found dead. Mm-hmm. And shortly after, the concern was expressed about his health and his apparent serious medical problems, he had disappeared. All those things were very unsettling to deal with. However, as you said, you can't speculate. You have to have facts. When you have people facing serious charges like this, you can't assume. You have to go with the information and the facts that you have, and that's what the state had to work with.
Our guest is Dana Owens, Deputy Yavapai County Attorney, talking about the Sylar Newton case. When we come back, I'd like to kind of chat in our final segment about the sentencing, what happened, and how that'll play. We'll take a short break. It's Countywide. Back after this.
Here in northern Arizona and throughout Yavapai County, people count on Orkin Pest Control. With over 100 years of combined experience, nobody knows how to protect your home or your business from harmful or annoying pests like the Orkin Man. To start service, contact your Northern Arizona Orkin Pest Control. In the Verde Valley, call 567-5100 or Orkin Pest Control in the Prescott area at 775-8772.
drugabuse.org.
Hi, I'm Steve Skurja with Yavapai Silent Witness. Marcel Gonzalez was murdered on this spot almost 15 years ago, back in March of 1997. We know that there is somebody out there who knows what happened in the alley that night. Yavapai Silent Witness is offering an $11,000 cash reward for information that leads to the arrest of Marcel's killer. For Yavapai Silent Witness, I'm Steve Skurja.
Every year, 2 million kids play doctor by taking pills not prescribed to them. Talk to your kids about the dangers of prescription drug abuse. The partnership at drugfree.org.
Welcome back to the program, Countywide. Dana Owens, again, prosecutor of the Sylar Newton case, the Christina Priam, Nancy Collins case. We described at the beginning of the show how, after the plea agreement you just described worked, the sentencing. Ms. Priam got 17 years, I think. What did she get? Tell us what the sentence was.
As I mentioned before, there were 2 separate cases, and basically she pled guilty in both of those cases at the same time, or in one plea agreement. So what the state did is, the offer that we made, in which she ultimately accepted, were to plead to 2 different counts. One count of child abuse that involved providing marijuana to the minor boys on the trip. And that charge, any child abuse charge actually can carry up to lifetime probation, meaning that a person can be on probation for the rest of their life.
Right.
So in that case, the judge ordered her and sentenced her to lifetime probation. In the second case, which is the case involving Sylar Newton, she was sentenced to 17 years in the Department of Corrections. Theoretically, when she's out, she will be on probation in the other case, and that probation could run up until her lifetime. But at this point, she's been sentenced to 17 years in the Department of Corrections, and that's flat time, which means there's no early release. It's a day-for-day sentence.
Okay.
To put that in perspective, someone, for instance, who might plead guilty or be found guilty at trial of, say, second-degree murder, would be looking at a sentence of possibly 22 years. So it's not that far off in terms of number of years. I know a lot of people are concerned that perhaps they got away with something, but I think we look at it based upon what we were able to charge, that it's a significant sentence for both of those women.
It seems that the frustration is that we just don't know what happened, or maybe we do. And unless someone does more talking, if there is more to say, we're never going to know that. It comes down to, did he wander away and die, succumb to the elements, as claimed? Did he die in the tent, and in a panic, someone carried his body to where it was later found? Did all of these things, and you don't know that either. And,
No.
and none of us will. I just want to ask, I don't want to put you in a spot, but that's got to feel very personally frustrating, having been so close to this case.
So many people put so many hours into looking for this child and trying to figure out what exactly happened. And you're right, the biggest frustration is that we will never know what happened in the final hours of his life. We won't know. We don't know where he died. We don't know if he was alone. We don't know if he was scared.
Yeah.
We know that when he went to bed in that tent, he was wearing nothing but a diaper. And that's all we know about what happened to him. But that child affected so many people, and I think it raised an awareness of the fact that you need to be so vigilant about your children. And if the 2 women involved in this case perhaps learned anything, and they both expressed it when they were sentenced, that they were very sorry that they didn't act sooner to care for that child, because no matter what happened to him, if he'd been taken to see a doctor or been taken to an emergency room, chances are this never would have happened.
We wouldn't be doing this show right now.
That's correct.
Dana, thank you very much for your work on this case and what you folks do, all the investigators, the agencies that you described at the beginning of the show. Everybody worked hard in the community, obviously very, very touched by this case. It's a sad one. Dana Owens, our guest today, Deputy Yavapai County Attorney. It's Countywide, and we'll see you next time.